series of lectures on the laity. It's a three-part series. It's being done at this time of the year as a response to the synod in Rome that was held during the month of October, where a couple of hundred bishops and 60 or 70 lay people gathered to discuss the questions of the laity in the church. I guess we had hoped that that meeting would generate a lot of good articles and talks and ideas that we could use. I'm not sure that that really happened. For many people, the synod was a great disappointment, and I tried to deal with that last week in talking about, in the midst of that, the disappointment of the synod, there were signs of hope, which I found in one particular woman, Patricia Jones from Liverpool, England, and tried to tell the story of the synod through her eyes. Well, we're continuing this whole discussion of the laity tonight, and we will deal with the question of lay ministry, and then next week, to complete the series, I will talk about lay spirituality. There's a story I want to tell at the beginning, and it's one that I've told many times, but I still like it, so I'm going to say it again. And that is, it's the story of Bill Bausch's parish in New Jersey, and he had I hope I didn't tell it last week, too. If I did, stop me. And anyway, he had a guest priest coming in for the noon mass on Sunday. Well, as it turns out, the priest didn't show up. So when the priest didn't show up, the people got the whole service started. They had the opening hymn, and people got up and read the scriptures. And a few people there were courageous, got up and made a few comments on the scriptures, preached a little homily. The lay distributors of communion got up and distributed communion for all the people after they said the Lord's Prayer, and they had some blessings at the end, and everybody went home. Well, the pastor, Bill Bausch, never received one phone call about it. Nobody called to ask whether they had really fulfilled their Sunday obligation or not. Nobody called to complain that the priest didn't show up. The whole thing just happened and went on with absolutely no problem. Well, that story helps to highlight for me a lot of the whole question of lay ministry. You couldn't have that happen, of course, unless you had a highly educated parish, people who had been well trained and understood their responsibilities and knew how to take initiative and so on. It's a great example of the power of the laity to take hold of a situation and to make the most out of it and to find their way of discovering the Lord in the midst of all of that. So it does set the tone for the positive sense that I want to convey in talking about lay ministry. This is a lot easier task than last week talking about the synod, because there is a great deal of activity along this line, and much of it is really a positive sign of hope. One other preliminary remark I want to make, and that is the very word laity is a problem for some people. I really have not run into too many people around here for whom it's a problem, but that has happened various places around the country. And there are people in the church who say they don't want to be called laity because they think it sounds like a bad word, that it's a put-down of them, that it's another example of the dominant group, that is the clergy, defining who the laity are. So they say we don't want to be called laity anymore. And we need to discuss this whole question in another way. And I understood that from Rosemary Ruther, a brilliant feminist theologian who I think is truly revolutionizing theology. I have a great deal of respect for Rosemary Ruther. She explained why this is. Why, that sounds so petty, like why wouldn't people want to be called laity? And she said the problem is that when any oppressed group lets the dominating group define who they are, they will always lose. So that if we have a church in which the clergy, who form 1% of the church, are telling 99% of the church who they are and what their name is, that indeed they will end up dominating that group, even though they are such a large majority. It's the same way that Rosemary explained with other oppressed groups in the society, that if they give the power to the dominating group to define the discussion, to set the category, to determine how it's going to go, and especially to choose the language, they will always lose. That's what the blacks found out in our culture, and that is very often what women are discovering. And so I have at least some feeling for that problem with the word laity. However, I haven't figured out any other way to talk about it. It probably is, and maybe before the night is over, someone will tell me. One way of talking about it, of course, is to say we are all members of the church, equal members by baptism, and we got different roles to play. And let's talk about those different roles. That is one way of handling the problem. However, it's a very difficult thing to give this lecture without using the word laity, and I've decided to just go ahead and do that. But I think it is good to keep in mind at the beginning that the discussion has to remain open-ended so that people don't get slotted into a particular place. Now, I want to do two things tonight. One, try to some sense of the extent lay ministry, talking about different model ministry, and then talk about how we're going to improve lay ministry in the church, and I will have a number of different suggestions along that line. So first of all, to talk about model, many people who read a theology book or go to lectures like become familiar with words. Word model is not an attempt to take a picture of reality, but it is to suggest certain themes or images which direct our attention. So what I'm interested in doing is talking about the models of lay ministry so in such a way that we encompass everything so that anyone doing any ministry wouldn't feel left out. It's a way of reminding ourselves what is happening, of directing our attention to the good things. And I believe that there is a tremendous amount of good going on. I believe that in all of history, we've probably never seen in Christian history so much educated, intelligent lay ministry happening in the church. It is a real revitalization. You see, sometimes when you start talking about ministry, the only thing people think about is the priest shortage, or the fact that women are not entering the convent. So we know that statistic that by the year 2000, we will have half as many priests as we had in the year 1970. Well, that's very frightening. I was just, I maybe said this before, I was down in Baton Rouge lecturing a few days ago, or last week or sometime, and I ran into two priests. One of them was worked with another one, and they were in charge of 5 parishes, and one of the priests was in charge of 3 parishes. And they were pretty far apart. I don't know, 40 miles or something like that. So, I mean, he is like a Methodist circuit rider. You know, he's out there running around, going to these various parishes. And that became, I mean, I suppose they had all had friends in the priesthood who were in the same boat. I mean, that's just the way they function down there. So when you start to talk ministry, you can get really hung up on the idea that there's not enough priests around, and I think miss a whole lot of what else is happening. I want to approach this whole question not just in terms of, well, we don't have enough priests, so we better get some lay people to do things. I want to approach it in a much more positive sense and to see that this involvement of the laity is really essential and necessary and filled with hope these days. Let me offer a definition of ministry to begin with. This is borrowed from Thomas O'Meara, teaches at Notre Dame, and he says this, and I'll go back over it because I think the ideas are important. He says that Christian ministry is public activity of a baptized follower of Jesus Christ, flowing from the Spirit's charism and an individual's personality, done on behalf of a Christian community in order to witness, to serve, and realize the kingdom of God. So I think when we're talking about ministry, I think all those things are probably important, that it is somehow public activity. It doesn't seem to be ministry if you sit alone in your room and say prayers. It probably doesn't qualify as ministry, at least the way most people talk. It's public, something that is available and can be seen, perceptible in another way. And it's done not just by anybody in this context, but by a baptized follower of Jesus Christ. And then next, where it comes the energy for it, well, it comes from two places, really. The Spirit's gift. The word charism means a free gift of the Spirit, and, I think this is important, an individual's personality. So I believe it's important to see that grace always builds on nature, that our personality is crucial in the way we make our contribution to the world. That the Spirit works not just in a vacuum, but the Spirit works according to our character, our personality, the development of our own talent. That's, I think, an important notion. That means that we don't all have the same tasks to do, don't have different functions, and all of those somehow enrich the body of Christ. There's another story, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but that comes to my mind that sets the tone for that varied contribution. I remember when I was down in Bowling Green, there was a young man who came to me with a theological problem, which was a genuine theological problem, not an emotional one, which is always often behind the theological one, but there was a genuine theological question, and I worked for months trying to help him deal with that, and we didn't get any place. And after a couple of months of that, one day he came to see me and I wasn't in, and he went to one of my colleagues who had about zero theological training, and as far as I could tell, it took her about 1 hour to straighten him out. Which always gave me this sense of the varied gifts that the community produces in trying to help people. So the Spirit works according to the individual's personality and character, and that enriches the community. It means we got a great variety. It means we don't need everybody ministering in the same way. We don't need conformity or some sort of new uniformity in the way this is all done. And why is this public service done by baptized people out of their spirit and their own character? What are they supposed to be doing? Well, one way of saying it is to serve and realize the kingdom of God. I always am leery of that phrase, the kingdom of God. As you know, it was a major metaphor that Jesus used. Whenever Jesus wanted to tell a story, he said, well, the kingdom of God is life. When he said, when he started preaching, he said, the kingdom is here. It's all through the Scriptures. It's the major symbol that Jesus used in order to help people understand what he was about. But we don't have kingdoms today, at least in our own kind of experience. We're more into democracy than monarchies. And so you begin to wonder if that word kingdom means anything to people. And doing sort of informal surveys of Catholic people, at least, you find almost no one who's clued into that symbol. Like if I would ask people, what's the major symbol or metaphor that Jesus used in his preaching or teaching, usually I find there aren't 3% of the people who would say the kingdom. Or as we currently translate it in the new translation, the reign of God, R-E-I-G-N, the reign of God. That's an attempt to put a more active sense to it. But we're just not into that. And maybe, I always wondered, why is that, since every Sunday you go to church and it says Jesus is talking about the kingdom and says the kingdom is like this and that. Why is it that nobody remembers that after hearing it for 62 years or something, you know. And I think that maybe part of the reason is because it just doesn't accord with our experience. So to say that we're trying to work for spreading the kingdom, maybe we got to find different language for that. One way maybe we'd say it is we're trying to humanize the world, trying to make the world a better place, or we're trying to spread peace and justice, and as our Jewish friends say, shalom. Oh, that we're trying to create the community of love. Or maybe even better, we're trying to create the community of justice in the world. That's what the great Protestant theologian Reinhold Niebuhr said. We shouldn't talk about creating the community of love because it sounds too dreamy. We can't really create a world where everyone runs around and loves one another. We should, though, be able to create a world where people have equal opportunity and where they can have a chance to use their gifts to improve the world and so on. So, anyway, this Alice ministry got something to do with humanizing the world, making the world a better place, helping people to live more effectively, creating a community of love or a community of justice, a better society. Now, there are a lot of people doing a lot of that kind of activity. So these are the models now. I really have 5 of them: liturgical, formation, compassionate presence, liberating activity, and service to the world. I've used those models a number of times in various settings and to try to, as a way of getting a hold of all of this. So the first of all is the liturgical model. So I'm looking back, I see my friend Mary Jane back there. Well, Mary Jane is in charge of our communion services at our parish, which we have at least once a week. And Mary Jane's job is to gather folks to do this and to help them to do a better job, to make sure it all happens. She went to a whole lot of effort to try to send them nice letters and creative ones to help them, and they met on occasion and helped with prayer services and so on. So Mary Jane is involved in what we would call liturgical ministry. She has a position in leadership in Corpus Christi Parish, and she goes about doing this task and so on. Sometimes all of that is filled with tensions and difficulties, and sometimes it goes well and so on, but Mary Jane has to figure out how to deal with all of that. That's her life task, and so on, to deal with the rest of us on the staff. Anyway, that would be an example of liturgical ministry, and as soon as you start thinking of that, well, you think of, geez, it's so multiplied all over the place. We got people, being lectors, and distributors of communion, and ushers at the Mass, and very often those people are sort of commissioned publicly to do this sort of thing. We have just a lot of activity like that. And sometimes, it gets quite sophisticated and quite growth-producing for people. I know down at Ohio State, they have all of their lectors. They have a bunch of them, and they prepare their own commentary for the Mass. They read a commentary before they do the reading, and they prepare it themselves. And they have, I remember the first time I celebrated Mass down there, I was amazed that someone came up and said, well, what do you think of this commentary? And I said, right, oh, that's very good. Where did you get that? And she said, well, I wrote that. And I said, well, you did? And she said, yeah. I said, well, we do that at every time we read. And then they had retreats for the lectors, and they all gathered together and so on. So an example of how all of that is going on. The second sort of ministry that we might consider here is the ministry of formation. Now, I see Dick Torchia over there. Where's your wife, Georgianne? Because I wanted to talk to her. Georgianne is not here. She's busy ministering to someplace. But Georgianne is in charge of our peer ministry program. So Georgianne has to try to, at the beginning of each year, has a difficult task of trying to gather some of the students who are going to minister to other students. And then she not only has to get them, and then she meets with them once a week for a while and teaches them certain skills on how they're supposed to be better ministers, and asks me to come in and talk to them a little bit about theology, and encourages them to find some specific way that they're going to go out and minister to other people. Well, we have here an example of what I would call the ministry of formation that Georgianne carries on. She's trying to help these people become better Christians, understand their faith, and to put it into practice. And she wants to equip them, give them the skills so they can listen well and have courage to go out and do all of this. Again, an example of formation. Well, we would find a lot of lay people doing it. I think it's interesting to note formation has a lot to do with theology and doing that kind of thing. We have had lay people here as a part of our Murray lecture series. I talked about Rosemary Ruther, an outstanding theologian. We used to have a time when we used to think that all theologians were priests, and that was sort of their enclave. And today we find more and more good lay theologians coming forward, people who have had the opportunity to study and have their doctorates and have published articles and written books and now are making important contributions. And hopefully they are working out of a different set of experiences than the celibate clergy. Rosemary Ruther, as you know, is married and has children and works out of a lot of that experience. There's a lot of involvement with the feminist movement, and her theology reflects that. So you get a whole different set of things. In the formation process, there isn't just one way of doing it and one set of rules to follow, but we need a whole bunch of people contributing to all of this. Now, the next category is compassionate presence. I don't know, the person out of the audience, I'm picking people in the audience, just at random. And I see my friend Michelle Genshi over there. And you probably see her beautiful smile on TV periodically. And so Michelle is, she's a campus minister, as they call it, at St. John's High School. And part of her job is to help to deal with those students there and to help them grow spiritually. Now, Michelle has a lot of programs she tries to set in place for them. She has to, get retreats organized for them and try to get them to do various other things. But I have the feeling that one of the most effective things she does is simply be present to those students, just be around. I suspect that as she's there longer, people will feel free to come up and talk to her and share their problems with her, and that will be hard. I mean, that won't happen immediately, but if Michelle is a good presence, if she's around and available, and if people come to talk to her, she doesn't put them down or try to play like she knows all the answers. She's willing to listen and so on, and if Michelle, offers some good advice to these people, whatever, she will become a more effective minister. But I think a big part of what she does is just being there. I remember I used to, this is back in the 60s, I used to go around lecturing at high schools and so on, and one of the things I used to tell them was to hire people like Michelle just to walk around and be a presence. Pay them $25,000 a year and put a sign on them and say, this is a person who's into CP, compassionate presence. And this person will understand or will be with or will somehow interact with you. So that's the third model. And as soon as you start talking about that, we see a lot of people who are able to do this. They have a quality about them. They give people time. I think one of the important things is that they have a sense of time. So when you talk to them, they don't feel like you're in a hurry. So if people come to talk to me, they think, well, they know I get 1 hour and that's it, and you've got 55 minutes and you better hurry up. So that there's a sense that, well, that's it, this is a busy man and you can't take too much time and so on. Well, that's not particularly good. And we need other people around who have another talent, and that is that when you talk to them, they give you the impression they have all day. The president of our university is very good that way, Dr. McComas. I was in to see him the other day and talking to him, and I said, well, better get going. He said, oh, no, stay around. It's nice to chat a while. Well, I mean, it just sort of blows your mind. I mean, this guy, he got 42 people to see. Well, let's just chat a while. Well, I mean, I think that's a beautiful quality. And I think that's one of the keys to this ministry of compassionate presence, of being around, publicly available, and giving people enough time so that they can feel free to interact and so on. So Michelle wins the compassionate presence model here. Who's next? Well, I don't know. Somebody must not have showed up. See, I programmed this all ahead of time. My next one didn't show up. That's the way it goes. Liberating activity. So I'm talking about liberating activity. I'm talking about people who are involved in the social justice end of things, who are concerned with the community and liberating the community and helping the oppressed and trying to meet the needs of those people who live on the margins of society. So I mean, I can think of all kind of people who are involved in this. A lot of times, I guess the students impress me that way. We have a Sojourners Social Justice Committee at our parish, and the image that comes to my mind was back maybe a year or two ago. One of the members of that committee represented the parish in an anti-apartheid rally. And it was, I thought a marvelous thing. I don't know exactly how that all worked out or why this young man got that assignment, but walking across the mall, I saw him up there with the microphone and struggling to get his message out and probably having a lot of nervous butterflies, but doing the job. And it was a marvelous thing, and he was there representing Corpus Christi Parish. Now, there would probably be other people in the parish with more experience in public speaking and so on, that you might say, well, why don't we have them doing that? But I thought there was a real power and witness in this young man speaking out against the apartheid policy in South Africa. And of course, he brought a history to that. I mean, he was on the committee for a long time, and he had done all kind of things on behalf of justice, and he was concerned with it. And he took a course at the university entitled Waging Peace that I was involved in. And so he tried to educate himself so he would know how you're supposed to deal with some of these great questions like peace and war. And he wrote a fine paper for me in that course, and so that he would prepare himself to make his contribution. I think he wants to do that in life. He sees himself as a peacemaker or a worker for justice. And so the training he gets in the university and the study and so on prepares him to go out and to do this in other settings. So liberating activity, again, as soon as you say that, we realize a lot of it goes on. Probably not as much as a lot of us would like. Very often it's a small cadre of people who are committed to this. Just usually small committees in particular parishes. But they're the people who show great courage and who often are suffering from burnout because they get so little feedback. I mean, a lot of these questions you work on for a long time, peace, justice, racial harmony, feeding poor people, and nothing seems to happen. It seems like it's a drop in the bucket. So how are you going to keep doing all of this? And also, they need a lot of support along this line. They need people to help them, assist them, to pray with them. They need recognition in many ways. So that's the fourth category here. We have here is liberating activity. Now, the final category is service to the world. Now, this would include people who take their profession seriously. people who take their job in the marketplace seriously as an opportunity to spread the kingdom, who say that, what I'm about is I'm not in liturgy committees and I'm not in the social justice committee and doing all that stuff, but I try to go to work and do a good job and humanize the work site. What does that mean? Well, I try to make sure that people are respected there, that people's talents are appreciated, that the job is done well and not in sloppy fashion. These people want to somehow spread this community of love and justice in the world, and that's where their focus is, their energy. And I look around, I see a lot of people who really end up doing that, and they think of this as their ministry. Or if they don't, I think it would be very healthy if we could get more people to think like that. I think the job would feel better. The job one would sense a deeper meaning. A lot of times one would say, well, what's this I'm doing? I'm going to work again and doing the same stuff over and no new challenges and I'm bored or tired with it all. Well, one of the ways around that, it seems, is to, in this service to the world, is to find deeper meaning in it and saying, this is my ministry, this is my service, this is how I'm trying to make the world a little bit better, and I draw on my Christian roots, and I draw on going to Mass on Sundays and to get my strength to carry this out. So the last one is this service to the world. Well, you could take all of these things. I tried to put it down in ordinary terms with people I know around here. You could probably take all those same categories and look around and see great lay people, well-known people like Cesar Chavez for the liberating activity and Dag Hammarskjöld for the service to the world, and a lot of great people who would exemplify those things. But somehow I think it's more powerful to think about people that I know or in the room or around who really do live out this sense of lay ministry. So there's a lot of activity going on. Second Vatican Council said we have to get the laity more involved. There's a special document on the laity. The Catholic bishops commemorated the anniversary of that document on the laity by writing a pastoral letter of their own called Called and Gifted. Came out in 1980, which would have been the 15th anniversary of the Declaration on the Laity in the Second Vatican Council. And Called and Gifted, I think, is a nice title they picked. And they said that, everybody, all the baptized people are called to do something, to contribute, and everybody has certain gifts or talents, charisms, the technical biblical word, for those free gifts of the Spirit that one is to use to try to spread the kingdom, create the community of love. So it appears as though, I often say, well, what did Vatican II mean? So on. Well, it meant a lot, and one of the things it meant is we have really succeeded in getting a whole lot of lay people with the sense this is our church and our world, and it's our responsibility to do it better. We have made great progress on this. And I think if some of you are old enough to look back and to know that's true by experience, to see the advances that have been made. I had a little luncheon today for faculty and staff on campus, and one of the women gave a beautiful testimony about the way things have changed. I mean, there was a lot of thought, well, this hasn't changed, and that hasn't changed, and we haven't made progress here, all the stuff the Synod didn't do, and so on. And she was just talking about how things have changed for her throughout her life, and how all these, as she called them, these little nitpicky things that everyone got upset about in the past, now don't seem so important, and that things have really changed, that there's a renewed spirit in the church and more opportunities for lay people to function and so on. I believe that's true, and it's really helpful to stop and pause and to think about all of that and reflect on its meaning. I see it as another one of those signs of hope in the world. Now I want to stop there and invite people to turn to a person next to you and to talk a few minutes about what I said. You might think of the models and the various activities that are going on. Again, you might try to respond in terms of filling in the picture and saying, well, there's other stuff that he missed there. He didn't think about this or that. Or that I do see this activity going on in these different ways. So I'd invite you to spend a few minutes talking about this first section of the talk. Up to this point. Questions? Well, lacking questions, we will move forward into the second half of my presentation, which is based on the idea, yeah, we got all these good things going on, a lot of progress made, but we really have to improve the whole thing. There's a lot of improvements that are needed in the lay ministry that is being done. Now, I want to address this in a number of different ways. First of all, I want to talk about the theological justification for it. Then I want to talk about improving relationships between laity and clergy, the importance of continuing education, the role of women in the church, and then we'll see if there's more time. We got some more to do here, but at least we'll try to move in that direction. Well, we got to figure out how to improve all of this. And one of the ways is that we have to root it solidly in theology. If things are not rooted well, they wither. If movements in the church are not solid and based on what's in the Scripture and in the Christian tradition, then they become fads, panaceas. They just come and go. And I think that's one of the things we've got to be careful of with the whole movement of the laity. We've had all kinds of new movements, new programs, and they come and everyone's excited about them, or at least some people are, and then it fades away. Well, we can't let that happen with lay ministry. It's not a nice fad that certain people are into for a while. It has greater significance than that. So we have to make sure it's properly rooted in a solid understanding of the faith and a good theology. So the first thing is theology of baptism. So and that's one of the great recoveries that we have in contemporary theology, a new understanding of baptism. In the old way, I guess we often thought of baptism as being cleansing the soul and taking the black mark of original sin off one's soul and washing clean, and so that one would get to heaven someday. That's why we were very concerned with baptizing little babies quickly, so that they would be saved from hell or from limbo. Well, we have a richer understanding of baptism today. And we are seeing baptism as the great sacrament of the Spirit. Baptism is our way of being initiated into the church. It's become a member of the church. And therefore, everybody who's baptized starts out as an equal member of the church. It's not like there's different classifications. Through baptism, we become as full a member as you can be. In a sense, you can't become a fuller member than by baptism. That's the way you enter. That's the way you start out. That's what it's all about. So it becomes the key sacrament. Not only does one become a member, but one is given responsibility for the community, so that we are co-responsible. We all have the responsibility of making sure the church grows and develops and is a good witness in the world. As our bishops, when they went to the synod, the 4 bishops elected by the other bishops in the United States, they said they went with the key phrase, co-discipleship. So that the idea then would be through baptism that every Christian person is made a co-disciple of Jesus Christ. All of us have an equal standing. We're all responsible for following the lead of Jesus Christ. Have to all, in our own way, try to make sure we are living up to the Lord's ideal. Co-discipleship. So baptism becomes a rich sacrament of the Spirit, in a sense, confirmation becomes almost a part of baptism. In fact, a lot of times the theologians have trouble figuring out how there's really a separate kind of sacrament. They come very close together in Eastern churches. They confirm people, as they did in the early church, right away when they're baptized, so it almost looks like one sacrament. So in this outlook, it wouldn't be good just to say that baptism washes away sin and confirmation gives the Holy Spirit. In this theology, we say baptism confers the Spirit, gives the charism, allows God's grace to work with our personality and our general character. So baptism is crucial, and it's what gives us this fundamental equality in the church, so that any lay person present here is as much a member of the church as the Pope is. And we have to keep insisting on that. It's back to, what did I say last week about Patricia Jones? She had a line in there. Oh, yeah. She said when she talked to the bishops, she says when she addressed them as father, but then she said, but I'm going to call you brothers also. And then she went on to say, this is this 31-year-old woman from Liverpool who's a lay minister. She went on to say that she was as dedicated to the church as they were. And she wanted that to be very clear. She's as dedicated to the church as they are. It's not like, well, here's these bishops, and they're really into this, and so on, and she's sort of out there on the fringes. Now, we had a period in the history of the church, we called it Catholic Action. Some people remember that from the 50s and early 60s before the council. And the principle of Catholic Action was that the bishops had a lot to do, and they were responsible for this church, but what they were supposed to do was to get the lay people involved. They were supposed to share their responsibility with lay folks. And that was a beautiful idea and a great advance. And so everyone said, that's marvelous. Now we can get in on it. But what was true about that was that they were working, therefore, on behalf of the bishop. They were sort of like the right arm of the bishop or of the pastor. And, of course, this new theology undercuts that. It says that's not the way it is at all. Lay people are not doing this to help the bishops out. Ministry's got to do with spreading the kingdom, of being responsive to the Spirit. Therefore, lay people do this not because we don't have enough priests or because the bishops are nice guys and want to let other people involved in it, but by right. By baptism, everyone has the right to minister. Everyone has a right to contribute their talents to the well-being of the church. And anybody who's doing that is not doing it simply at the behest of the bishops, or simply because the bishops have decided this is a nice thing to do in a modern democratic world. That's why it can't be a fad. It can't be a passing phenomenon. And that's why this point is important, because we don't see this, then lay people are always going to be dependent upon the clergy. Always. And the clergy, as the 1% dominant group, will always have control over the 99%, the majority oppressed, if you use that kind of language in the church. So we must zero in on this whole notion of this importance of baptism. Then that leads us to a point that I guess I made before, and that is the importance of charism, which is rooted in a recovery of the importance of the Holy Spirit. Now, in our piety in the Western world, we've often been big on God the Father, and then many people are big on Christ and following Him, but we've had a very underdeveloped, what we call pneumatology, that is, theology of the Holy Spirit. The Eastern churches have always been much bigger on that. The phrase that we are temples of the Holy Spirit, that notion has been crucial in Eastern thought. In the Western world, we've largely lost sight of that, but we are in process of recovering it now. So we have books coming out on the Holy Spirit. Yves Congar, the great French Dominican, has written a 3-volume work on the Spirit. And we find that filtering down in many different ways. Leonardo Boff, the great Franciscan liberation theologian from South America, has written the book The Church, Charism, and Power, which says that the new model of the church we need to develop is that of the sacrament of the Spirit. A lot of the lectures I've been giving around lately have been trying to develop that theme. I think it's an excellent new model of the church. So we talk about the church as the herald and the sacrament and the community and the institution and the servant community, all developed by Avery Dulles in his book Models of the Church. But we need new models, and this one of the sacrament of the Spirit is good. In other words, the church ought to be a community where the energy centers are multiplied, where power is available, that it images the Spirit which breathes where she will, a Spirit that is fluid and powerful and spontaneous. So a church that was a sacrament of the Spirit would not be stodgy and set and dominated by institutions and structures, but a church that was responsive to the Spirit would move, would be zestful, would have a certain spontaneity about it. There'd be an excitement about it. Many of us have found that in the charismatic movement, for example, or looking at the history of Pentecostal churches here in the 20th century in the United States. So the church as the sacrament of the Spirit leads us to a development of this notion of charism, these free gifts of the Spirit given to everybody for the common good. That's what Paul said. It's getting back, in a way, to Paul's letter to the Corinthians in the New Testament. You ever notice the church in Corinth looks a lot different than a lot of the churches we would know? In the church in Corinth, you got a lot of messiness. You got a lot of confusion. You got a lot of people having trouble getting it together. But one thing they don't lack is excitement and enthusiasm. They're into this thing. They're not structured. They don't seem to have a bishop who's in charge. Paul founded them and left. They don't seem to have priests who are running things, but they got a lot of people with a whole bunch of different gifts. So some heal, and some prophesy, and some teach. You got a whole bunch of different charisms. It's a charismatic community. So part of this new theology is to recover that Pauline notion of the church, which is so different from the one that became dominant in the 2nd century in Christianity, which was very much centered on a residential bishop who ran things in a given geographical area. So we got the sacrament of the Spirit, and we have the charisms resulting from that, and therefore we have everybody who's baptized with certain gifts that they're supposed to use and have a right to use to contribute to the well-being of the church. Now, all of that is important not in order to remember the name of Yves Congar or something, but because it's a solid theology rooted in the Scriptures and in tradition that says that lay ministry has got to be, that we're on the right track, and we've got to continue and make it grow. And that's the way we'll keep it from being faddish, so someone doesn't come along next year and say, well, it was a nice phase we're in lay ministry, but now we're back to clericalism. We got to get the priests and nuns back in the classroom or something. We won't be able to do that because there'll be a theology that will challenge that and say everyone's got a right to contribute. Why don't we do our one-to-one for a minute and see if anybody understood what I said. Why don't you see if you're at theological section. Yes? Yeah. Well, that's a good question, and I think the point is that the theologians don't know that. I think that's fundamentally the place that we're at right now. I would say you don't have a clear answer to that. I think I see a trend. The trend is to link confirmation more closely with baptism. In fact, what we've been doing in the United States is keep pushing confirmation further ahead, like late grade school and then high school and further ahead, and keep insisting that it is the sacrament of Christian maturity. That's been our trend now. I think something else is going to happen. I think we're going to find out that won't work. And that's going to force rethinking, where the rethinking will go back to linking confirmation with baptism, and my guess is that someday we will do the confirmations right when we baptize people. That's my guess. And I say that as a quite, do I want to say, uneducated opinion. In other words, I have not done a lot of research on that. But in reading the literature, I pick up that trend. I can see that people are starting to raise that question, that we're moving it the wrong way, we ought to be moving it back. And then it would make it clearer about this centrality of baptism, and probably help us in the ecumenical movement too, in terms of dealing with our Protestant friends who have had trouble understanding where confirmation fits. Just for anybody who's troubled by that, I might just say that the question of the number of sacraments and so on has been debated all the way through into the Middle Ages, and it never has been too clear exactly how many of these sacraments there are. People thought there were 11 at some time, and some thought there's 2, and it's just really been quite debated all the way up to the 16th century, the Council of Trent. Anyway, that's a guess on my part, a very uneducated guess, and for the local reporters, I'd rather not be quoted on that point. Yep. Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, that raises a question about what baptism is all about. And of course, our Baptist friends, that's been their whole line, that you ought to baptize people after they know what they're doing and they're an adult. And I've run into a tiny minority, but people who I think of as very educated and insightful, of young people who are doing that with their kids, Catholic people. And that's given me pause to think about that. I don't yet know what to make of that. My own sense is that baptism makes a whole lot of sense with the infant. That is, that if you think of it as the initiation into the family, into the parish family as a way, you start out early. Much of what really happens good with young people is they learn at an early age. I mean, you take on the mores of your parents in a way. You take on the value system in the family. And I think that's the principle involved in the early baptism, that you're starting the person on a path, and they're learning it early. It's getting into their bones and blood. They're picking this up as a worldview, and as they go along in life, that's what they carry with them. In one sense, psychologically, it would be impossible to do it any other way. Let's take, you've got a good Catholic family here, and they go to Mass regularly, and they pray before meals, and they look at the Scriptures now and then or something, and all of that. Well, I mean, even if you didn't baptize the baby, you'd be doing it all. They'd be drinking it in a sense. And what baptism does is simply make that clear. Baptism, two of the really great things about baptism now are the prayers for the parents, the emphasis on the parents. And the prayers say, that beautiful prayer for the father that says, you will be the first of the teachers of your child and in the faith, and let's pray you'll be the best of teachers. And that's realistic. That's where the action is. And baptism symbolizes that. It's important. I think for many people, baptism is one of their deepest religious experiences, having their child baptized. I have a feeling that with a lot of modern couples, it's when they first take the whole thing seriously. And I think it doesn't happen at marriage so much, but it happens at baptism. That's my own sense. The commitment to one another is really occurring then, when you're looking and saying, wow, what are we going to do now? I mean, there's a life we got to take care of, a human being we're responsible for. And I think that is a large moment. It's a deep religious experience for many people, and it connects in with the religious experience of birth. As I think, especially with the fathers being present, is very real for many people today. So it makes every sense to me to baptize people at an early age. I'm going to go on. Next point, relationship between laity and clergy. So we must improve this if we're going to improve lay ministry. First, let's look at some of the problems involved from the viewpoint of the clergy. Well, very often the clergy are fearful of lay ministry. I mean, it's like, well, someone's going to take over. I won't be important anymore. Or the fears come by saying, well, I don't know how to do this. I mean, I was trained to run things. That's how they taught me in a seminary. And now here's these other people running around and want to do things, and I can't figure out how to relate to them. How am I supposed to include them? Oh, remember, if something goes wrong, I'll be the one that's on the carpet with the bishop. Not all those lay people in my parish. They'll go free, but I'll be on the carpet. So, in other words, there's a whole sort of fear that can be connected with this. Another kinds of fear that involved is the fear that these people know more than I do. Here's these people, they got time to read books. I'm running this parish, and I got some of these lay people that take theology courses. And they learn things, and they know more about some of these things than I do. And they ask me if I read a certain book, and I haven't read it. Well, you get into a very frightening kind of position. In fact, for some clergy, it gets to the point where it's impossible. Like, geez, if I was to try to catch up with all the lay people in my parish so I knew as much as they know, I'd have to read all day, every day for the next 20 years. It's impossible to read all this stuff and to find out what's going on. They know more about Second Vatican Council and new theology than I do. And therefore, it is a very threatening kind of situation. So there is a downside, I think, or a negative side in all of this, where the priests are sort of feeling in a defensive posture. One feels attacked, perhaps, and bewildered by the new ball game. I've said this often, but the old story the priests tell is they trained me for one ball game, and I came out ready to play, eager to play, and they changed all the rules on me. And what am I supposed to do? So there is this certain sense of often being overwhelmed, which is connected with what is commonly called the funnel effect these days by the priest. That is, everything that anybody's got that they want to complain about, and anything that hierarchy decides they want to do, or some people in a diocesan office want to do, or some people dreaming up new programs, or lay people want to do new things, it all goes in this gigantic funnel that comes down my head as the pastor. And so they're sitting there feeling again put upon, overwhelmed by the funnel, wondering how anybody would have enough stamina or strength, wisdom to cope with all of it. On the other hand, we find among clergy a very warming attitude. We find clergy who say, we want to move this direction. This makes sense to me. I love to collaborate with people. It feels better to work with others. We get more done. The parish is enriched. Thank goodness for our lay people. I'm glad that they're so educated. I love to talk to them because I learn things. They've read things I haven't read yet, and they tell me about them. Therefore, I get stimulated. So it reverses, and there's some clergy that are able to look at this whole situation and say, well, that's great, beautiful, I love it. We're in a new age, and I was made for this age. Thank goodness I didn't have to minister all my life in the 50s. It's great to be in this time when we are collaborating and so on. So you get a sort of ambivalent feeling here about the laity on the part of the clergy. Now let's try the analysis in another way. Again, there are certain negative feelings. I don't know, why did I start with the negative? I would start with the positive. There are certain positive feelings that we have, which largely stem from the immigrant experience in the United States. That is, when the people came over from Europe, didn't speak the language, for the most part, or very often. Had trouble getting jobs, didn't know how to make it in the political world, and the person who helped them, probably more than any single individual, was the priest. The priest was educated, learned a new thing, wrote for him, back home, tried a job, got in the mainstream. The Catholic priests for the Catholic immigrants did a tremendous job. And all of us stand on their shoulders. It's a remembrance that's in the Catholic psyche, even if some people can't recall the stories. It's passed on in the blood. It's passed on in the general attitude that Catholic people have towards the clergy. And it's based on, well, your grandfather would have never got a job if it wasn't for Father so-and-so. Or, boy, when we were down and out and didn't have anything, you could go over to the parish and they took care of you over there. And so we build on that fund of goodwill. And it's an amazing thing. I was just talking to a newly ordained priest who was experiencing the same thing that I experienced a number of years ago, being first ordained. And it is an overwhelming sense of this respect, this care, this regard that lay people have for the clergy. And it was interesting to me. I didn't know to what extent that still existed, really. But same thing I experienced 25 years ago, he still felt today. And felt the same sort of jolt of instant respect. And I mean, where do you get that kind of instant respect and so on, except from history, from the good work that the clergy did? So I think still there, and so on. And there's ways in which that's out of bounds. People have been placed on pedestals, so on. I see that fundamental goodwill. Now, then to the negative side. And I think here of a woman who told me, was talking about clergy. Her view of the Catholic woman, involved lay minister, said her view of the clergy was they had this comfortable niche. They have it made in life. Most of them are really not too committed to all of this. They aren't I feel like I'm nothing, and I don't count around here anymore, and you people are running everything, and I don't have any say in it. That hurts me, and it takes away my identity. I mean, that's why I was ordained, you know, and I hear all you other people do everything that I thought I was supposed to do. Well, we need people who are willing to say that. We need people, lay people who are willing to talk about their anti-clerical feelings with the clergy, and to get them out and to say it, and try to get some healing. So we have to address this, and I think maybe we have to figure out ways to make it happen. I'd like to see it happen spontaneously, but very often it doesn't. Therefore, maybe we have to set up ways for it. You have to take your pastor out to lunch, as I always say. I won't tell that same joke again. I will show one moment of restraint now. Secondly, how we're going to help with this, and that is we want to develop more collaborative approaches to ministry. Need to be able to work together in partnerships. One of the keys to that, in my opinion, is that people feel responsible and accountable in their own areas. So if we always have somebody looking over the layperson's shoulder, always having to say, can we do this, can we do that, we're not going to get any place. So my theory of this is we need situations where people have great autonomy, where they have control of a certain amount of money to do things, where they are able to take initiative without seeking permission. That this will be a part of the collaborative approach to ministry, it seems to me, that we will have to develop. Well, in other words, I guess I could put it simply. We've got to work together and learn from that, and then we've got to talk together so we can figure out how to overcome a lot of these difficulties and problems. why don't you do a little one-to-one for a minute, and then we'll move on to the next section very quickly, and that is that if we're going to improve lay ministry, we have to insist on the importance of good, solid theological education. Again, there is the sense that people can minister well just because they have goodwill and they're nice people. And I don't believe that's true. Not in the long run. I mean, that might be okay for a while. But if we're going to really get this thing going, people have to know what they're doing. They have to know the tradition. They have to know what the opinions about things. They can't be going around claiming things are absolutely true when there really are different opinions on a particular question. We need to stress the importance of theological education. Theology is an ally. It's a help. My mentor, Carl Rahner, insisted that the more scientific theology is, the more pastoral it will be. The better theology is done, the more helpful it will be to people who want to minister in the church. That's a very important statement of Rahner. The more scientific theology is, the more pastoral. That means the better it's done. The more it knows the tradition, the more it's in touch with the questions of the time, the more help it will be to people to figure out how to minister well. We need to create a climate where people think, yeah, if I'm going to minister, I should be reading books or taking courses. So we need to prepare for this. And people who are thinking of somehow doing more in the church in the years ahead, they need books. So my theory is I send them books and try to tell them things to read so that when the time comes, they have a solid background and basis for entering into this ministry. Now, there's one important thing we're going to have to develop, and this is not going well, and that is we have to learn to reflect theologically on real experience. I mean, I would love to learn how to do that better, and I haven't really found that out yet. I experimented with, I talked about Georgianne Torchia before, who runs our peer ministry program. Now, I experiment with this with her. The way I do it is, one of the peer ministers who's doing some ministry, we all gather in a group, and the peer minister then tells the story. He says, well, you know, my ministry was to go down to Appalachia with the collegians, and we went down and we did some praying, and we worked, and he describes the whole thing. Then we begin to reflect on this. I lead, and I try to deepen the question. Well, you know, what does that mean? Why did you go down there? Or what meaning did that have for you? What part did prayer play in all of that activity? What does you find in the scriptures that would help you understand what you did? Where do you find something in the tradition that would motivate you to keep doing that kind of thing? That is a reversal of the way theology is done. And we have very few good models for that. Very few. And when I try it, I always feel very inadequate and very halting kind of effort. Not satisfied at all with the way I have learned to do that. So, and I see very few, if any, good models of that. But you can see what it would be necessary to do. And I think, in a sense, everybody could do that. We could look at our ministry, whether it is caring for the family or humanizing the work site or taking care of the lectors for the church. We could all stop and think, what does this mean? How am I supposed to do it better? How do I find the Lord in this? Where does prayer come into it? And so on. But to do that well is extremely difficult, and we will have to keep practicing it, I think, and share our ideas on what works and what doesn't. I would love sometime to sit in on a group where a guy really knew or a woman really knew how to do that. But I haven't found that yet. Next, the problem of women in the church. We can deal with this very quickly and move on to the next point. Didn't I deal with this last week? Well, I mean, the problems are not hard to find. There's a growing anger and frustration. It's clear we have people leaving the church. Some of the finest young women who I taught and was close to in school and so on have left the church and become Unitarians or joined other groups and so on. And, it's sad. Understandable, but sad. The other thing is that I believe that this whole phenomenon is, in a sense, masked, covered over by the fact that we have so many courageous, generous women who have stayed in. And it's awfully easy for people who don't want to recognize the problem to look around, well, see all those people? They haven't left, so what you got is just those other malcontents left, that's all. So that in a sense, the very generosity of many women covers over the problem. Now, how are we going to deal better with all of this? First of all, I think we need to continue to press on all fronts for full rights for women in the church. We need to make sure, let's say that's the long-range goal. Let me put it up this way. Long-range goal, we have to fight for this. I mean, if I can call Bishop and some time with them, I will try to bring that up and make aware of frustrations and what women are feeling and thinking. I sort of think of that as the responsibility. I think any forum that we get, we speak up. The bishops who end up making decisions and need to know what real people are feeling and what frustrations are there. I think it's important to remember in this regard that there appear to be no good biblical or theological reasons for not ordaining women to the priesthood, and that therefore the burden of proof in a sense falls on the other side of those people who say that women can't be ordained. At least my mentor written a very scholarly article that very few people, I think, could understand, but the essence of it is that when you look at the whole history of the question and so on, that the burden of the proof on the Vatican and not of people want to say that women should be ordained. And that's saying he can't find a good biblical theological reason for denying it. So we have to keep working at this and looking for a rational solution. I mean, again, wherever I was talking recently, came up, and I remember the conversation, and there are no solutions to our problem apart from this. The clergy problem, the shortage, for example. And unless we get married clergy and women clergy, we are just going to gradually move ourselves more and more into a hole where priests are spending all their time driving from here to there to say Mass, and can't do anything else but drive around and say Mass and hear confessions, and where lay people are running parishes and upset because they can't anoint the sick or hear the confessions or say the Mass. So you're going to get people mad on both sides. Lay people aren't going to like it, and the clergy aren't going to like it. And there's no solution. No solution. You can do all you want about dividing up and saying, well, we're going to lop off a priest here and get rid of one there and combine and collaborate. So you can keep doing that, but eventually it won't work. So the only solution to our problems is to work at this radical solution, which is to ordain the real leader of the given community. Now, in the interim, what do we do? Well, I think, first of all, they have to have a lot of empathy for the women who lead. I understand that. Everyone's got their frustration level, their tolerance level. And people have to leave, they have to do that. And that's, I think, understandable, and I'm sure that the Spirit can be at work in that whole movement as well. Secondly, we have to take advantage of all legitimate opportunities. I mean, there's a lot of things that women can do that they aren't being allowed to do. Where I was in the East, the parish in Washington for a while, they didn't let the women distribute communion or read the scriptures. So, so there's all kinds of places around the country where even what women are allowed to do, by universal law, they're not able to do in this parish. Need to work with team ministries, make sure women have their proper share of responsibilities in the parishes, and so on. I say this, about while I said that the women who stay, in a sense, cover over the problem, I think they also, from just a purely sociological viewpoint, have the greatest opportunity to effect change. It just seems to me that when people end up leaving the structure, they lose their leverage on it. I think of Charles Davis that way, the famous theologian who left over birth control. I mean, what influence has Charles Davis really had since on the renewal in the church? Well, he's had some, but my sense is that the push for change comes from those people who are within and still take seriously what the institution is all about. Therefore, the courageous and responsible women who say, no, I'll stick with all of this, do have an opportunity to make a difference. And I mean, it seems to me that is a very powerful kind of witness and a generous one. And just sociologically, we have to have that. We won't keep the pressure on the institution otherwise, I don't think. People could argue with that. I'm sure there's another side to it, but that's part of how I see it. Well, I said, and final point, the last point, that is, if we're going to improve lay ministry, we must put greater emphasis on that fifth model of service in the world. We can't make it seem like the only lay ministers we really like and trust are those who are involved in churchy things, like communion distributing and lectors and pastoral associates and so on. We must raise up to equal status the ministry in the world. We must recognize those people. You know, it's common to have a commissioning ceremony for the lay distributors of communion. But, you know, when do we have the commissioning ceremony for the lawyers and doctors and people who attend the families and so on? We must raise that up. That is a legitimate thing. There's a whole group in Chicago who signed a famous Chicago statement a number of years ago, these are advanced liberal Catholics, and who are upset with the whole movement of lay ministry because they see it getting too churchy. It's represented by, in a sense, the same problem they have with deacons. The deacons are brought in and are too much around the altar and not much involved in service in the world. So that we have to make sure we raise up the service to the world as an important part of lay ministry, of Christianizing the world, humanizing the society as a whole. And I think we have not done a good job of that. In fact, we say lay ministry, many people think of communion distributors automatically. We've got to get people thinking automatically about making the world a better place, establishing justice and so on. Otherwise, we'll get way out of balance. I think we already are out of balance, and got to get that back so that people who are considered to be really good Catholics, even though they're not on the parish council or the liturgy committee, but who are taking their belief to the work site and to the family, to the neighborhood, and so on. Well, I think that we will stop there, and yes?
I'd like to say something about what you said, Dave.
Well, you talk in here, Mary Jane. This is not an open forum. This is... Go ahead.
No, you were talking about every periodic life is up in the book, and everyone knows I want to get it. You're talking about women being ordained. I think a majority of women want to be for their discipline time, not always want to be ordained. And as long as we talk about ordination of women in the church, people will never respect that you do not say the ladies who you put in I don't see that will not be respected. I'm not accepting that. Although I see where some women are capable of good ordination.
comment on part of that this time. Just briefly, I mean, I think that I agree with your analysis that that could hurt us. On the other hand, I don't see any solution overall to establish that kind of equality. It is important to fight for. It's not only symbolic. It is symbolic, but it's more. It will enrich the whole mix of the community, because the ordained person is the official leader. The leader has a job of setting tone and giving vision, and we need to assist that function. So in my mind, crucial. I agree that it could deflect us from doing the other important things, but without it, you're going to be walking up a treadmill.
Well, I'm not saying just not anything.
Yeah.
You must get a balance here. We're talking about living in the truth.
I'll go for balance, Mary Jane. Very good. Let's call it a night. Next week, lay spirituality. I hope you come and bring a friend.